Welcome to the George Washington Cold War Channel. I'm Giabi Lee. Now, for our inaugural program, we have a very special guest all the way from California. With me is Professor Salim Yaqub, who is a history professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And I know you recently published a book. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Here it is. It's titled Imperfect Strangers, Americans, Arabs, and U.S. Middle East Relations in the 1970s.
We were just talking about how interesting that book's title is. Tell us what prompted you to come up with a title.
Yeah, it's a bit of a play on words. A perfect stranger is someone who is completely unknown to you. So an imperfect stranger would be someone you do know somewhat. And what I'm arguing is that in the 1970s, people in the United States and into the Arab world came to know each other much better than they had previously. So they became, instead of being perfect strangers, they were imperfect strangers. It's also referring to the fact that they are flawed human beings, so they're imperfect in that sense too.
Right, and I found it so interesting that in the book you said the American diplomacy in the 1970s kind of set the tone for Washington's foreign policy in that region going forward. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Sure. Basically what I argue is that in the 1970s, a number of patterns were established, opportunities missed, that created a relationship between the United States and the Arab world that generally became a lot more antagonistic. At the same time, domestically, people of Arab descent were able to establish themselves and make a place for themselves in American society, and that is something that we see carrying over today. This ironic situation where you have on the one hand a great deal of animosity between the United States and the United States government and Arab society in general, but also a measure of acceptance for people of Arab or Muslim background in the United States.
And in the book you emphasize the role of Arab Americans in terms of U.S. policy. And do you think that still stands today after 1970s?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I talk about in the book is the way in which Arab American activism and the fact that there were Arab Americans as a visible presence in the country affected the way people in the United States talked about the relationship with the Arab world. And certainly that began to be visible and important in the 1970s, and I do see that today in the sense that there's a greater awareness of the Arab world and of its concerns, in part because of the activism of Arab Americans, and that continues today.
We want to focus a little bit on Syria right now. How do you think the role of Arab Americans affect the debate over Syrian refugees, or the U.S. accepting Syrian refugees rather?
Sure. I mean, I would say, again, it's not a direct, a powerful and direct impact on the actions of the U.S. government itself. Certainly there are Arab American individuals and groups who are at the forefront of efforts to accept Syrian refugees and to pay attention to the Syrian crisis. More broadly, the fact that there already is a visible Arab and Muslim presence in the United States, it has kind of a contradictory impact. On the one hand, it raises anxiety among some segments of the population, and as I'm sure many people know, there's a lot of fear of terrorism and of Islamic extremism being smuggled into the country through the refugee population. And the fact that there already is a Muslim and Arab presence in the country helps to exacerbate that anxiety. On the other hand, the fact that a larger number of Americans get to see Arabs and Muslims in their midst and recognize them as neighbors and friends and co-workers and so forth creates among those people a more accepting attitude.
Also in the book you said that there was a pattern established in U.S. relations with the Middle East from the 1970s, and some of them you find problematic, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the manner in which the United States sought to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict. What essentially happened was that the United States committed itself to resolving the dispute that Israel had with Egypt in particular, just one Arab country out of the several that had major issues with Israel. And these, although it was seen by most Americans as a very positive, constructive, and hopeful step to achieve a peace agreement between Egypt and Israel, the rest of the Arab world was very unhappy with that agreement because people in the other Arab countries felt that their concerns were not being addressed, and that it would be harder to address them now that Israel and Egypt had made peace.
Last but not least, I wanted to also know about what kind of impact Arab Americans' activism had on the media industry and coverage of U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question. It really starts to become prominent, that kind of activism and media critique, in the 1970s. And in general, Arab American activists had somewhat more success, I think, in encouraging the media not to rely so much on the most blatant stereotypes of the Arab world. And they were able to get some media outlets to soften their caricatures. They've had less success, I think, in encouraging the media to portray certain issues that are of concern to them, especially the Arab-Israeli issue, in ways that the Arab Americans, think are more fair. They've had more success in addressing what are recognized to be very blatant and even racist stereotypes of the Arab world in popular media.
Since 1970s, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for being with us today. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.